Happy Thursday, those of you joining us. Thank you so much for coming. We will get started in a couple of minutes as we get a critical mass in here. But you'll see, if you will drop your name and your role and where you're from in the chat, we'll get to know each other a little bit that way. Also in the chat, feel free to ask questions at any point and I will collect them for the presenters at the end. And you will all receive these slides and resources in an email within the next couple of business days. So you don't have to take manic notes because you will get it all. And thank you again for joining us today. Good to see an array of people in the chat from different walks of life and around the country. And as I was saying a moment ago, you all receive the slides and the resources within the next couple of business days in your inbox via an email. So don't worry about taking crazy notes and ask questions in the chat at any point, and we will hold them till the end. And we have a lot of content, so we will go ahead and get started. I see people are still joining us, but we will all catch up. So I am Ana Beltran. I am the director of the Grandfamilies and Kinship Network, which is the first federally funded technical assistance center on the families here at Generations United. And we're so pleased today to have one of our partners, Kathy Kinsner from 0 to 3, and Don Davenport from Creating a Family, to present to you all today about support groups and how important they are and tips for how to make them even better. So at the Technical Assistance Center has been running now for 2 years. We've just started our 3rd year, which is kind of amazing to us. And our purpose is to provide technical assistance, which really means assistance, forget the technical word, because we are not IT people, to the array of tribal and state and county governments around the country and nonprofit organizations that serve the families. So we don't serve the families directly because communities do that best, because laws, programs, and services vary so much around the country. But we're here for you as service providers. So please reach out in any number of ways, including by with individual questions. You know, who's got a great support group curricula? Well, drop it a question to us using that form on the top right. We have webinars routinely, including the one today. And next week, we're going to start rolling out an opportunity for 2 jurisdictions to receive ongoing in-depth technical assistance from us. So look out for that opportunity. And all of this is available on our website. And at the bottom of the website, you'll see we have a new LinkedIn page where we share the latest and greatest. So please follow us on LinkedIn as well. It is my pleasure. I will share that later. It is my pleasure right now to turn it over to Don Davenport. And thank you so much for joining us, Don.
Oh, thanks for having me. I hope everybody can see my screen now. So this webinar is going to be led by Creating a Family and 0 to 3. Creating a Family is the national support and education training nonprofit for foster, kinship, and adoptive families. And our mission is to strengthen those families and the professionals who support them by creating expert-based, trauma-informed resources, community supports, and trainings. And we have many free resources you can use with your families on our website, creatingafamily.org. 0 to 3 works to ensure that all babies and toddlers benefit from the family and community connections critical to their well-being and development. Since 1977, the organization has advanced the proven power of nurturing relationships by transforming the science of early childhood into helpful resources, practical tools, and responsive policies. And as mentioned by Ana, they are a partner in the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network. So the little housekeeping up front, this is the format for this presentation is going to be a presentation that will be done by me, and then we will open it up to Q&As at the end. And please, as Anna said, write your Q&As as you're listening, and you have questions, write your Q&As in the chat, and Kathy and I and Anna will do our best to answer them at the end. So this presentation is based on over 5 years of research in parent support groups, what's working and what isn't, and almost 3 years of research specific to kinship caregiver support groups, what's working and what isn't working there. Creating a Family has done multiple surveys, interviews, focus groups, and then 8 listening sessions with kinship caregivers and stakeholders to understand better what their needs are and what they are looking for. There is a lot more research on support groups for foster and adoptive families than there are for kinship families. Whenever possible, we are relying on the research done for kinship families, and we will refer to that here when it's available. One thing to note is that, first of all, there isn't a lot of research onto kinship support groups, but the research that does exist in kinship support groups is very much oriented towards formal kinship caregivers, those that are involved with the child welfare system. And the vast majority of kinship caregivers in the US are informal, meaning there is no child welfare involvement. So there's almost no research that is included that we've been able to find on the support groups for informal care. Throughout the presentation, I will cite research, but usually I will only cite one, even when there's multiple, just for the sake of space. We will be talking about resources at the end, and there is a handout of these resources that you will receive after the webinar as well. All right, we're going to start with the poll. We kind of want to know who our audience is. And I am going to apologize because I realized after the fact that we did not include perhaps the most important audience, and that is kinship caregivers themselves. So if you are a kinship caregiver, check other, and you can just put kinship caregiver in your, or grandma or aunt or whatever in the chat, and we will know who you are. I'm going to give you just another minute to everybody write in the chat, and then we will go on. We'll look at this one later. All right, let's go on. All right. So who are kinship caregivers? Compared to the general adult population, kinship caregivers are more likely to be female, Black, single, less educated, and older. And there's, I think a lot of people think that most kinship caregivers are not in the workforce, but more than half are employed, but they're more likely to still be in poverty, and many of them are not in the labor force. And this is, again, compared to the general population. And when compared to non-relative foster parents, kinship caregivers, either that are outside the foster care system or inside but not licensed foster parents, have significantly fewer support services, be they financial, parent training, peer-to-peer support groups, anything along those lines. And kinship caregivers need ongoing support and education, and one of the most effective ways of providing that education is support groups, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So why do kinship caregivers need support? There are so many ways. One, their family interactions are often very complex. Kinship caregivers also are more likely to have negative health outcomes, social isolation, and depression after they have become kinship caregivers. Kinship caregivers have a lot of additional challenges, things that they need to understand. And one of the top things we hear over and over again is understanding their legal options. They often need financial advice. They need help in interacting with the schools, understanding the different options, understanding what services are available through the schools. They need help with family relationship issues. As we talked about a minute ago, their family relationships are often complex when one member of the family takes over the caregiving of another member's children. And this is important. They did not choose to become parents or caregivers at this stage of life, and that adds a lot of additional challenge to their lives. This is, as you will receive this as one of your handouts, it's part of its executive summary from the listening sessions that we did, and we asked them what their needs were, and their top needs were finding support, having access to support groups, understanding legal options, and parenting support. And again, this will be in your handout. And parenting is often more challenging for kinship caregivers. Older caregivers may be out of sync with the current parenting trends. Think internet, think phones, think screens, think video games, think sexting, all the things that parents that are currently, younger parents are currently in the midst of having to deal with. And they don't have a network of friends who are also going through it. They don't have a friend to call up and say, how are you handling this? Or let's do this together so that my kid can't say that nobody else's mom is making them do this. They're often not aware of resources in the community that are aimed for kids because they've been out of that network for a while. And they are parenting children who have experienced loss and trauma. And very often, I think this is highly overlooked, very often they are parenting children who were prenatally exposed to alcohol and drugs. We know that trauma itself can cause challenges, behavioral challenges, emotional challenges, and learning issues. When you add prenatal trauma, prenatal exposure, substance exposure, it is a double whammy for these kids. And these are who our kinship caregivers are often raising. So why do caregivers come to support groups? What does the research say, and what have we heard? Creating a Family runs a number of caregiver as well as other support groups. They come because it's a place where their life and what they're going through is normal. And it's nice to be around people who get what you're doing. It's also a safe place to express some of the negative emotions, anger, resentment, grief, loss, the host of things that kinship caregivers often feel. And it's a great place to meet friends, find camaraderie. And let's be honest, it's also a place to get away from the kids. And some kinship caregivers are actively coming because they want to learn how to deal with some of the issues that they're facing with the kids that they're raising. And sometimes they come because they're in crisis and they need support immediately. And I love this quote. One aspect of groups is that they can place issues in context, helping members move from seeing their problems as particular to their child and family to understanding them as common and, in light of the child's past, expectable. Thus, group participation can normalize feelings. I feel like that is such a powerful statement. So, support groups are an effective way of providing support. The research on kinship support groups shows that support groups are a great place for sharing feelings. Also giving kinship caregivers a sense of entitlement because they're learning something. As they learn, they feel more competent and then feel more empowered. It's also been shown to decrease, support groups are shown to decrease stress. They're also a great place to work through feelings of guilt and regret and other feelings that are not uncommon with kinship caregivers. Other research found that kinship caregiver support groups are a great place to help bring closure for unfinished business and can mitigate distress through sharing your experiences and also sharing strategies for how did you cope with this when you faced it. There have also been shown that after attending support groups, there are improved relations between grandparents or other kin and the children they are raising, an increase in parental confidence, an increase in social connections, an increase in knowledge of community resources, and perhaps more important, an increase in use of community resources. And support groups can help educate kinship caregivers on how to navigate the child welfare system. And the benefits of having participated in support groups last long after these support groups end. In this particular study, it was only a 10-week support group, and they went back 12 months later and surveyed the participants, and they found that the benefits they had seen after attending the 10 weeks had lasted and had continued to the end of the 12 months. And groups are an important way of continuing ongoing training. And I think this is going to become an even bigger issue than we currently face. Now that the federal rule is final that allows states to change the amount of training required, I think more states are going to be doing that, and they're going to be reducing the number of hours that they're going to train their formal kinship caregivers that want to become foster parents, which are not all of them for sure. But that is, and I'm all in favor of that. That is a great thing. We want to decrease the barrier to becoming a licensed foster parent for our grandfamilies. But the reality is, these kids' behaviors and their challenges do not go away just because we place them with kin. These are often longstanding, the result of trauma or prenatal substance exposure, and our kin need help in raising these kids. And my fear is that unless we get in there after the placement, after the parents are in the trenches and after the child is in that home, if we're not providing ongoing training to help them figure out how to handle some of these, my fear is that we're going to see an increase in disruptive placements. And again, keep in mind that the vast majority of kinship caregivers are not receiving any training because they're not connected with the child welfare system. And so we certainly need to be training those because we're providing the only training. So I will get off of my soapbox, but I do think it's really important to realize that, that we have a unique opportunity to strengthen these families, and I think it's going to become a more urgent need. And community support groups are one of the most effective ways, research has shown, for people to retain the information they are getting. Here's a couple of quotes from research. Education combined with social support holds the best potential for addressing unmet needs of grandparents raising grandkids. And we know that education alone is not enough. Research has found that support groups that integrate social support services with education are the most effective at meeting the needs of grandfamilies. There's a lot of talk now. I mean, there's a lot of, everyone knows there's so much resources available online for educating parents who are raising kids who've experienced trauma or other forms. They're usually online, they're usually self-paced or asynchronous. And they absolutely have a place. Creating a Family has an online learning center, and we have over 70 courses that fit that bill. However, interactive trainings where you're in community and in a group are really how the human brain is wired to learn, and there's good evidence that shows that information is retained more when it's presented in that format. And this is just another research that says the same thing. People learn best in community. And it really is regardless of whether it's in person or online, or at least that's research was showing that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. We know that attendance in support groups reduces foster placement disruptions. We haven't been able to find any research that exists on attending support groups as it relates to placement disruption in kinship care. Common sense would say that since some of the issues are the same, that we might see an increase. And research indicates that about 17% of formal kinship placements, those are with child welfare involvement, fail and the child re-enters foster care. This research says that post-placement permanency for kinship placements increases with the availability, access, quality, and utilization of pre and post permanency services. And the majority one was support groups and training. So if support groups are so wonderful, so helpful, so darn good, why aren't there more of them? Well, the answer is running a high quality group takes time and effort, and not all groups are created equal. So we're going to enter the part of the presentation where we talk about different types of groups that exist that you might want to consider if I have convinced you that indeed running a kinship parent support group is worthwhile. Some of the different types of groups. The first group that we're going to talk about is social media groups, primarily Facebook. They can be public or private. They can be agency specific or open to anyone. Some of the advantages you will have with social media groups: 24/7 access. Somebody who's having a problem or thinking about, worrying about something at 1 o'clock in the morning can jump on and post on it. I apologize, I'm going to have to stop periodically and drink some tea. Another advantage, people can respond at their own speed and at their own way. They can think through the responses. They don't have to do it on the spot. Obviously, there are no geographic or transportation limitations. And you can have unlimited participation. I will add that can be both a pro and a con. And it's more accessible. Facebook groups or other social media groups are more accessible for people with disabilities. However, there are some challenges. The first one is you have to be on Facebook, and not everybody is, and not everybody wants to be. But I will say that this is the age group that encompasses kinship caregivers are the ones who are more likely to be on Facebook if they're going to be on any social media. The asynchronous nature of somebody posting at 1 in the morning because they really need some support lends itself to less immediate replies. Somebody might not see your post until a day later or a week later. It really depends on how active the group is. We don't know the answer about whether or not social media groups, you can create a sense of community. I think it can cut both ways, but that is certainly something to think about. Would it be as equal as if you had some other type of group? These groups do not provide training or active skill building. There are ways to increase skill building, and one of those ways would be to post scenarios or post questions for your audience to answer, and then to continue to, as you go along, to respond with good resources. So you can increase skill building, but that doesn't really lend itself to that. And you're not going to get CE credit. That's really only necessary for licensed foster parents, for kin that have become licensed, but still you're not going to get any of that. And I can't stress this enough. Facebook groups have to be actively moderated. You have to have a clear set of rules, and you have to be moderating it frequently. To give you an example, Creating a Family has a very large online support group, right at 10,000. So it's very large. But we have devoted one staff and then 1.25 staff that spend a fair amount of time on there. We have trained 8 volunteer moderators, and we have a separate moderator group where we convene to discuss things. So it is, I think people sometimes think of, let's just start a Facebook group and think it will be not involved. It needs to be involved if it's going to be done well. All right, another distinction when you're thinking of types of groups is informal groups versus structured groups. So unstructured groups, informal groups, we just get a group of grandfamilies together and let them start talking about whatever is on their mind that day. Some of the advantages of unstructured groups is little planning is required, and the emphasis really is more on community building than on training. Oops. Some of the challenges. These type of groups can become what we euphemistically call venting sessions. They can also become places that are dominated by just a few people who have more to say. And in some of our surveys of participants, this is what we have heard. This one was from a participant who said, I found the group to be hellish for me, so negative all the time, frequently aimed at birth parents or the system. I wanted to learn about parenting strategies that worked. It wasn't that I didn't want anyone to vent, but it went to a kind of toxic extreme and there was no balance. And here's another one. It was a welcome break from the kids and good to be with people who understand our life, but there were some people who needed more time, which left others with little more than a chance to say hello. And we would contrast that with structured groups. And this is what we do not mean. We do not mean some type of lecture, because that is not how support groups should work, or trainings should work for that matter. It means encouraging discussion, but around a specific topic. And so we're still going to be learning about your life and talking about your life, but it's going to be less likely to disrupt into a venting session. Some of the advantages: it's a balance of community building, training, and some venting, because let's be honest, much of why we get together with friends is to be able to complain, and that's healthy. So we do want some of that as well. It can provide some type of learning, or at the very least, some type of increased understanding. Structured groups can. And some of the topics that we have found, both through research as well as from our own research, that kinship caregivers want to know more about. I've mentioned legal issues before, and that's usually off the top of the list. Understanding financial implications of their choices. If I choose this, what does that mean financially to me? Learning parenting skills, especially for the kids, if kids have experienced loss and trauma or prenatal substance exposure. Managing the child's behaviors, managing relationships with their adult children, that's a big one. Helping youth transition into adulthood. Understanding what services are available there. Going back to some of the challenges, structured groups require more facilitator planning time. I would say that actually depends on what you're using and how you're doing it. There are some programs, curriculum, that don't require much planning time, but there are others that do. And it also requires facilitator training. Another choice when you're thinking about groups is open versus closed groups. The first way, and that has a couple of different meanings. Open can mean open membership or closed membership, meaning when that usually support groups themselves are open, so somebody new can come in a year, 3 months, 2 years after the support group started. However, there are certain trainings where they're called cohort trainings, where you really expect people to start on session 1 and stay with it until session 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. And so you need to at least think through that. And another, when we speak of open versus closed, another thing to consider is whether it's your support group or your training is only open to clients that your agency is serving, or whether it's open to anyone who wants to join. And there are other places to look for support groups that might exist. Some churches run support groups for kinship caregivers, and some parenting organizations might run like a triple P for kinship caregivers. So that's another thing to think about if that exists in your community. And keep in mind that all the challenges and the advantages and the challenges can be ameliorated with any of the groups with planning ahead of time if you are aware that this is a potential downside. So what makes a high quality group? The $64 million question, right? I need to first say that we firmly believe that any group is better than none. So if any of the types of groups I mentioned seem easier or more doable for you or for you to get behind, then do that. That should be where you start. However, based on our experience and our review of the research, groups that combine discussion and training with community building have the highest quality groups and are more likely to be effective for both the participants and the facilitators, and more likely to last. And here's another quote from research, that you provide some type of educational structure for the meetings, allowing time for discussion on these topics and training their facilitators. These type of groups are more successful. And support groups for parents of children with special needs and trauma exposure that create a sense of community combined with skill training are more likely to report a reduction in the children's problems behavior. So one of the questions that we will often get is, what is in a name? Do you call it a support group, or do you call it a training, or do you call it a gathering? And I think that it's important to think about at the beginning. For we run a kinship navigator program, and we have support groups as a part of that. And we started off calling them support groups, and we have now switched to calling them kinship gatherings, kinship parent gatherings, kinship caregiver gatherings. I think it does matter what is in a name. And we often get questions of how big of a group, or how small of a group. You need enough people there that you can have a discussion, and you don't want so many that it will interfere with the discussion. But there really is no magic size, and most groups aren't struggling with getting too big. That's what we are seeing anyway. All right, this is a really relevant question that's been a hot topic in the last, 3 years? Wonder what happened in 2020 that made this one all of a sudden such a hot topic. Now, when we're talking online versus in person, and when I speak of online, I am not speaking about Facebook groups. We are talking about interactive, video-based groups, Zoom groups, similar to this that we're doing here. All right, and Ro or somebody else, if you'll read out the poll results when we get them. All right, the first poll, let's just focus on this one, just answer this one. Did you run online support groups prior to COVID? And if somebody can tell us what, let's give them a couple of seconds to vote. And if somebody who's looking at it will tell me what the answer is. I'm not sure that somebody is going to be able to tell us who is. I think it's the way we are set up here.
I can do it. So we have 12% who said yes, they run online support groups prior to COVID. About 88% said no, and many more are doing it after and during the COVID pandemic. So 65, over half, were doing it during COVID, and they seem to have kind of kept to it. So 52% are still running online support groups, 48% are not.
Interesting. That's about what we would expect, and thank you, Anna, for doing that. All right, let's dig into it. So in-person groups, let's talk about some of the advantages of in-person groups. Human-to-human contact, we know, can aid forming a sense of community. And geographic proximity is nice as well. It gives you, you can ask somebody to, hey, I've got a doctor's appointment, can you watch my kids during that time? Or you know somebody is having an operation, so you can do a meal train for them if they're geographically close. You can also share resources. You know, who are you using for a tutor? My kid is failing algebra. Or what therapist have you found that really works well? However, there are some challenges to our in-person groups. Cost, I don't think it's huge, but there is a cost associated. You need to, if at all possible, provide childcare. You may have to pay for a space. You have to pay transportation cost for your facilitators to get there. If you're serving a meal, there is that. So there are costs associated with an in-person group. Another challenge with in-person groups is just the hassle factor for caregivers. They've got to have transportation. They've got to have time added for the transportation to get there. They have to give childcare if you don't provide childcare. And even if you do provide childcare, they got to get the kids in the snowsuits, get them into the car, get them to the, get them strapped in, get them there, blah, blah, blah. So there's just a hassle factor associated. In-person groups may be harder for people with disabilities to access. They're not as convenient for rural areas because they're more spaced out. But they're also not as convenient in urban areas without good public transportation. All right, so let's talk about online groups. What are some of the advantages there? There are no transportation barriers. There are no geographic limitations. So a support group can cover multiple counties. It can cover an entire state. It's easier for caregivers with mobility issues, depending on what their abilities may be limited to, assuming that they are in the mobile stance. It's probably easier to do that via a computer. There's no need to find childcare, but you do have to work around children being present. People can, I seem to think this is not as a terribly big one, but people who don't want to speak can type it and put it in the chat. And some people really like that function. And you can utilize the whiteboard, you can utilize breakout rooms, but honestly, that's not an advantage over in person because that's available there. Another, and this one can be a big advantage, it is easier to find enough people to form the base of a group. You need enough people in a group so that there's going to be a couple of people at least showing up each time to aid in discussion and to make newcomers feel welcome. And that is easier to do online because you have a greater geographic area that you can be searching for these. Some of the challenges for online groups: connectivity issue. Do the participants have enough broadband to do a video conference? Technology phobia. We've had mixed experience on this. I think there is an ageism out there that says that older folks are afraid of technology. And when in our focus groups and in our listening sessions, we asked this question, and we did not find it to be that big of a problem. However, with some of the callers to our Kinship Navigator program, we have seen it to be more of a problem. So I think the jury is still out. One tip, if you are concerned about this, is to schedule a session prior to the actual support group and work through the challenge, work through technology with the people who you think are going to have a problem, so they're not having to do it in front of others. And the other, another tip would be to have them use their phone. We found that most people are much more comfortable with their phone than they are a tablet or a computer. So even if they have a tablet or a computer, that encourage them to use their phone. And in our facilitator training, we include a lot of other tips that fall under this. You may need to limit the size because at some point, if you get too many people on a video conferencing type of meeting, it really does interfere with the ability to share. And a challenge, the jury is still out on this. Can you create a sense of community for online groups? We've done, at Creating a Family, a little bit of research. We ran a pilot of our curriculum, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And with this pilot, we had both online and in-person groups. And this is really what we found. About 100% of the in-person group participants said that they found a sense of community, and about 94% of the online participants said they found a sense of community. I did think it was interesting that when we asked facilitators this question, 100% of the in-person facilitators thought that a sense of community had been created, but only 86% of the online facilitators, and yet approximately 94% of the participants thought so. So as I said, honestly, the jury is just still out. The only other research we found on this was out of Kentucky, the Kentucky Virtual Pilot. It was a 10-week program to see, and they really weren't testing for sense of community, but they did find One of the outcomes they were looking for was they found their online groups fostered meaningful interaction amongst participants. They thought that they got adequate information, and they felt like that they had stronger social supports after attending the 10 weeks sessions, and they reported that they felt more competent and a decrease in parental stress. So back to the challenges for online groups. Most of the time there are not children or teen groups that meet simultaneously. This is not a given, especially teen groups could be happening simultaneously, but I don't know of many people who are doing that. The presence of children can interfere with following through on a thought. It also can interfere with honest discussion if you're having the children. As my grandmother said, little pitchers have big ears, so if they are around, that can be a problem as well. And there is multitasking, and that is a significant issue. It is hard to get it. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here about how many people have checked their emails or Instagram since you've started this webinar, but the truth is multitasking is a challenge, and we have a lot of tips that we can give you in our trainings, but the truth is I don't really know how you completely get away from it. So, what's best? The truthful answer is we don't know. What I can say is that we know what is happening with the groups nationwide that are using our curriculum. And the majority of those groups that went online, and very few of them were online before the pandemic. Most of them went online during the pandemic, and the majority have stayed online after the pandemic. However, the majority of callers to our Kinship Navigator program have strongly preferred an in-person group. So, as I said, I think the jury is still out, and we really honestly don't know the answer to that one. We did survey one long established, very successful kinship caregiver group that utilizes our curriculum, and we asked them to survey their participants, and they said that they had a very small majority that were still preferring to stay online. In other words, it's all over the board. So you just need to check with your group. There are hybrid groups, and hybrid can mean a number of different things. It can be when you have a group with some people in person and some people online. It can mean running the same program, the same week, say, but once online and once in person. That's not really hybrid, but it kind of has the same vibe, so I included it. Or you can do mostly one, like you could be mostly online, but then have some social gatherings periodically, or mostly you can be in person, and then during the busy season, say during the holidays, you do it online. So you can kind of shift it up. This one cracks me up, but I know of at least one researcher that is experimenting with virtual reality support groups. So at some point, we may all be wearing those funny little headsets, looking around, our heads doing weird things. That may be in our future. The thing to know about the whole hybrid situation is that it is a rapidly developing field, and things are going to be changing quickly. Hybrid will allow for last-minute changes in the schedule, and it provides people who strongly prefer one over the other would have the access to choose it that way. There are some challenges. They are distinctly, especially when you're doing a group where you have some people online and some people in person, it is very difficult to facilitate, and I speak as someone who has tried to do that. Technology challenges exist. You've got to be able to have the people online see the people in the room, and you have to have the people online be able to hear the people in the room. There are some great technologies that exist to overcome all of these, but those technologies come with a price tag, so that is something to consider. Harder to see name tags, I guess that goes without saying. And as I said, solutions do exist, but they would require training, and they're going to require money. All right, it's time for our next audience participation, keeping you awake. This one is for what is your biggest challenge in running a kinship support group? I will give you about 10 seconds or so to respond, and then Anna, if you would read the results, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're getting an overwhelming response on getting kin to attend so far. We'll give it another second or two here. Yes, that is by far the largest category. Getting kin to attend, 74%. Relevant material, 19. Finding a convenient location, 16. And then cost, 15%. So getting kin to attend, the big one.
All right. Well, that does not surprise me. You are in good company. Every time I have ever asked this question, that is exactly the answer that I get. So let's dig into it. How do you get kinship caregivers, grandfamilies, aunts, uncles? How do we get them to participate? I guess that's the $64 million question. The challenges are both to attendance, are both structural and perceptual. Some of the structural challenges include choosing a time of day, day of the week that is convenient, providing childcare, providing transportation, and just the general busyness of life is a structural impediment for kinship caregivers to get out the door. They're tired. That is a real concern. Some of the perceptual hangups are what is going to be discussed just isn't relevant to them. Or nothing is going to be discussed, and it just, people are just complaining, and that's not rewarding to you. It's not worth the hassle for you to show up. The advice that they're getting is not practical. It's more theoretical, and they're looking for immediate practicality or applicability. And sometimes too much information is given, and they just end up feeling overwhelmed. So what are some of the solutions to getting people to attend, getting our grandfamilies to attend? One is convenience. And this is where it may make sense to offer both online and in person if you can. And obviously polling your group to find out what time and place is the easiest for them. Including some type of structural training or skill building information. Make the group more than just a venting session, or someone told us, put some meat into the meeting. Make it worth their while to attend. Offer CE or in-service hours. This again only applies if you have kinship caregivers that are licensed foster parents, but it's something to consider. Finding a convenient location, and don't overlook churches, Ys, or Boys and Girls Clubs. Often this will be within their mission to provide space, and often space at no charge. And providing childcare. And again, go back to, if you're doing it at a Y or a church or one of those places, it's worth asking if they'll provide the childcare, particularly in churches. If you're doing it, say, on a Wednesday night when they're already having childcare, they might be willing to include yours. Another hint for childcare is to, if you're near a university, to save costs, look for interns from any of the programs, education programs, psychology programs, social work programs, and see if they will come and provide the childcare. All right, offer a child or a teen group. Parents will often, caregivers will often think, well, my kid needs this or my teen needs this, so I'll bring them. But when they're there, then they can attend one because they're having to wait to pick the kid up and bring them home. And when you're doing that, I would just say you do need enough families so that you have enough teens that are going to attend. If you think you hate attending a group with just one or two other people where you're expected to talk, multiply that by about 100, and that's how your teen's going to feel. Also, you might want to warn parents in advance of the topic that you might be talking about at the teen group. Food, the more the better. Meals are better than snacks. Snacks are better than nothing. Also, at the end, summarize with a couple of easy to implement strategies that you've talked about. That kind of helps people be able to focus what they're supposed to do, or what they want to do, or what they've learned. And this one I love, touch points. There's been interesting research that shows that touch points between facilitators and participants, for each touch point, it increases the likelihood that the participant will come back to the group. When you advertise a group, include the topics you're going to be talked about. We often find that it's the topic itself that brings people in. So list that or include that. Again, this is only for those involved with the child welfare system, but have caseworkers hand out advertisements of the support group when they go on home visits. And door prizes. Who doesn't want to win a gift basket or a Amazon gift card? Another challenge is facilitator burnout. Another challenge to running support groups is facilitator burnout, because it can be time consuming to run high quality groups, and seldom do people allocate enough time. That's where choosing a curriculum or choosing something that will take some of the burden off would help. So how often to meet? Well, whatever suits your group. In person, most meet monthly, and they usually meet for 10 months. Online, some meet monthly, and they usually go for 12 months. That is a distinction. We have found for the groups that we run with our Kinship Navigator, we do it twice a month. One where we have a skill building, we use a curriculum, we use our curriculum. And then the second one, we either continue the discussion of what started, and because oftentimes they've had time to think about it and they've tried some things and they want to talk about it, or just talk about whatever is happening in their life, or we bring in somebody from the schools to talk about IEPs or stuff like that. So that's what we do on our other one. How long to meet? Generally an hour and a half. If you're only going to meet once a month and you're trying to really focus on community and skill building, you might extend it to 2 hours. That's what we usually are seeing, what people are doing. And another tip is survey or evaluate your members and find out, is this meeting their needs? And find out what they want you to do. So now, I'm going to let you hear from a grandparent.
So it was after my daughter got in trouble and we got her 5 kids and they were going to school, that the school sent home a plain white envelope to give to me. And in there was about grandparents raising grandchildren. This wasn't until like 2009 or 2010 that I found this group. And when I went to the group, I just sat there and cried because I didn't know that there was anyone else going through this. I didn't know there were solutions to certain things that I was going through. And it was very hard. And I sat there and I just cried. And as I began to talk about things, they were so supportive. And they said, oh, I went through that. This is what you do. It was just amazing. I tell a lot of people that first support group saved me, because if I went in my backyard one more time screaming and crying, the neighbors were going to call the police. So they literally saved me. I started getting help, resources, and that made a big difference for us.
All right, as we enter the resource section, I want to, there's one other choice you're going to need to think about when you're choosing resources. The first, you have to make a distinction between sequential resources or topical resources. So sequential resources allow you to go deeper into a topic. You start from the beginning and you progress through and you learn about this topic. That could, and if the topic is of relevance to your community, there are advantages there. The disadvantage is that it discourages people dropping in. It discourages, particularly when you're doing it, if raising community is part of it. If training is all you're doing, then sequential can work. And that is contrasted with topical. And topical is where you choose the topic, and the topic is what you talk about at that particular meeting. All right. Now we're going to turn it over to Kathy Kinsner, with 0 to 3, and she's going to talk about grand connections.
Thank you, Dawn. That was amazing. So well organized, and I learned something every time. I was especially interested in this Smith quote about placing issues in context, because for me, that's what it's all about. Mm-hmm. Grand Connections is one of several programs we're going to talk about. This one is specifically for kin caregivers of kids birth to 5. So if you are recruiting through, say, a pediatric practice while baby visits, or early Head Start or Head Start, this is perfect. 0 to 3 created this. We had the advantage or disadvantage of starting to write in 2020. So we knew off the bat that we needed both in-person and online options. We had input from our partners at Generations United, the National Family Support Network, and other experts in kinship care, and we were very grateful for that. The workshops are 90 minutes long. They are free, so everything you need is in there. And each of the 7 workshops includes an hour of facilitated discussion. It's the time for adults, but a half hour afterwards for a 2-generation activity between the caregivers and the kids, a story to share, a follow-up project. And because once you've got a group of kin caregivers in the room, you have literally hundreds of years of child rearing experience. We use a parent cafe approach. So it's not just a lecture, but it's really drawing on the collective wisdom of the group. I noticed in the chat, someone asked about finding leaders. This is really suitable for anyone who has experience with groups, being able to solicit advice and participation and relieve tension, make sure everybody's heard. All of that is important, but all of the material to be taught is all there for you. There's no train the trainer. There is a 1-hour webinar on our website so that you can see, what led to the making of this and how you might use it. But we're hoping it's useful right out of the box. And I'll show you what's in it in the next slide. So seven workshops. When we piloted this, we ran it weekly. The first 2 that are in the peach color are really foundational and completely about what it feels like to be a kin caregiver. Workshop number 1 includes 3 videos. Facilitators can choose from among them, where Generations United Grand Voices, we did a little biographical video on several families. And that is there to serve as a prompt. When we talk about placing issues in context, it's all right there. People talk about what was challenging to them. The first one also includes a discussion of what local resources are available. And we would expect throughout the course of 7 workshops that families get to know each other and do as Victoria talked about in that clip, where it's like, I've been through that. Have you tried this? The second one includes a discussion of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and what the impact of trauma is on children that are entering a grandfamily, and how one person, one adult, the participants in the workshop can mitigate a lot of the things that have happened to a child up to this point. For grandfamilies, still where there's still parental involvement, we talk a bit about navigating that relationship. After that, everything after that is developmental. So it's all about how kids of this age behave, what you can do about it, what's of concern, with a particular emphasis on things that have changed in the last 20 or 30 years. The ones in purple, screens, meal times, and challenging behavior, are the result of some specific surveys. A couple years back, we asked a group of grandparents who were caring for their grandkids part-time about tension between grandparents and parents when it comes to child rearing. Half of the participants surveyed said there was tension, either some or a lot, and these three topics were where that tension arose. And that's not coincidental, because these are really areas where the thinking has changed a lot in the past few years. For example, I'm sure many people in this Zoom meeting were told that they couldn't leave the table until they finished what was on their plate. That's not what we tell people anymore. Interestingly, a survey at the University of Michigan of parents showed these exact same issues from the parent point of view as being causing tension between generations. Finally, we finish it up with sleep because there's been change in the advice on safe sleep over the last 3 decades or so. We know now to put babies on their backs to sleep, and that really causes a great reduction in the number of deaths from SIDS. Also naps, also getting kids to stay in bed once they're put to bed. So all of that is discussed. And finally, grandfamilies really want their kids to succeed in school, and they may not know quite how to do that. The 7th workshop is making the most of everyday routines, which are ways to sort of integrate math and reading into the kind of talk you do to kids all the time. I will say that it was our expectation and actually requirement in the pilot sessions to start with workshop 1 and go through 7, just for a sense of building community. You wouldn't have to do it that way. All these could be used freestanding. So if you wanted to kind of lure families in by a topic that doesn't say, we know you need help. You could do, for example, a workshop on, are you having trouble helping your little ones to manage screens? Come to this workshop and kind of expand from there. Next slide, please. So in the last half hour of the workshop, as I said, kin caregivers and kids read a story and do an art or cooking activity together. This particular art activity was from the workshop on sleep. We read the book, How Did Dinosaurs Go to Sleep? And then everybody created a dinosaur from a child's handprint. And the real mission here is not a specific book or a specific activity, but helping grandparents and other kin caregivers figure out the value of reading aloud and what you can talk about when you do something along with a child. I just saw somebody ask about the topics available in Spanish. Yes, all of the participant facing materials, which include a slide deck for each workshop, and handouts are available in both English and Spanish. I think the videos are subtitled in Spanish as well. So yes to all that. All the facilitator materials are only in English. And next slide. So following the pilot program, we did ask participants to respond to a few statements, evaluating how much they enjoyed the program. The statements were things like, it respected my experience, I learned from others, I felt supported, and nearly 100% either agreed or strongly agreed with statements like that. There was one outlier who didn't really connect to an online experience, but otherwise everyone said positive things. We also talked to facilitators after the pilot was over, and we heard a few things that John has already mentioned about how to make this work. One site did direct outreach as a means of recruitment. They had case managers who talk to families weekly, and they were like, come on, you want to do this? They had, as Dawn mentioned, an extra meeting, meeting 0 before 1 through 7. They had a meeting just to explore Zoom functionality. Another group discovered that the anxious people, the people who are anxious about technology, are always logged on early. So they just came on early as well, and could coach people who were struggling through whatever their issues were. People gave a poll to decide a weekly meeting time. Another group had facilitators with lived experience. All the 3 people that ran the program were grandmothers, and they created a PowerPoint that showed them with their grandchildren. You don't have to do it that way. Personnel might not allow that, but they felt that that was a real strength. Again, Dawn mentioned, frequent touch. They sent out meeting reminders the day of the meeting. And the art activities what they did was really genius. When you think about trying to do an art activity online with a toddler in your lap and art supplies, that doesn't work. So what they did is they talked about the art activity and the book. They assigned it as homework, and the next week people came back and talked about what they did and how it worked. That particular site mailed or dropped off both art supplies and the picture books to the houses of the participants, so they had them in advance. And next slide, I'll tell you about how much this all costs. What is free is everything you need content-wise to run the program. The lesson plans are really detailed. They have dialogue, they have prompts, they have there are resources if it's about a topic that you're not familiar with. The videos are there, slides in English and Spanish, and handouts in English and Spanish. You can find all of those on the website that's listed there. Also, if you go to the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network and look up Grand Connections, that links to us as well. In terms of what to budget, we figure 2 people for every 2 facilitators for every workshop. If you're doing it online in particular, you kind of need 1 person who will discuss the content, and another person who can troubleshoot technical issues. Picture books and art supplies. If you are, Dawn, can you go back one?
I'm trying, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's okay. You know what? I've got it here. Picture books and art supplies. Some of those things you'll have or can get at the library. If you're doing it online, you need to collect them and send them out. We did incentives. People did incentives a couple of different ways. Sometimes they gave like a very small gift card each week. Sometimes some sites did a larger gift card at the last meeting or for attending a certain number of meetings. And one group made self-care baskets that they raffled off at each meeting. The meeting place, as Dawn mentioned, childcare for this is important because the hour-long meeting at the beginning is really adult discussion and not for kids. And as mentioned, food and transportation. And that's it from me. I look forward to your questions, and back to Dawn.
Thank you, Kathy. Grand Connections is amazing. Thank you. So another resource that is available is one from Creating a Family. It is our support curriculum for kinship families. It can also be used for foster of adoptive families. It's a video-based curricula, participatory with lots of discussion opportunities. And it is designed for both, we have 25 in the library. It's designed for both in-person and online. It can be used either way. It is what our attempt is to combine support as well as training. We want to provide structure, but we don't want it to be rigid structure. We want to encourage discussion around a topic. We want it to be, and we hear that it is, interactive, engaging, and fun. Perhaps not as fun as that picture depicts, but fun nonetheless. And we have 25 curricula in the library, and by January, we will have a package that is specific to kinship families. We already have some of the curricula that is directed to that. These are the curricula, these are the 25. I'll go a little slow so you can read. This would be age ranges from birth through young adulthood. For the ones that are specific to kinship, we have partnered, which they're coming up, I think. Oh, no, I skipped over them. I went too fast. Dr. Joseph Crumley has partnered with us on some of those. So each curriculum comes with a video, a facilitator guide, a handout, an additional resource sheet, and then certificate of attendance. Again, that is only necessary if people who are attending are licensed foster parents and need the CE. All of the curricula are expert-based and trauma-informed. And the outcomes the goals we were seeking and what we measured and what we continue to measure, what we were looking for was to create a sense of community, reduction in caregiver stress, increase in caregiver confidence. And we also wanted it to be easy to use for facilitators. And so we also evaluated towards facilitator satisfaction. And the person who asked in the chat about how do you find people, this one you would not have to be trained. We include with this a very thorough facilitator training for both online and then facilitator training for in-person. So somebody without experience or training can do this. Our goal is for this to be turnkey. That both takes some of the variability out of who is running it. It also makes it easier. It makes it quicker. It makes it cheaper because you don't have to worry about planning time. And we hope it helps avoid the facilitator burnout. Ease of use is something we were aiming for. So the facilitator guide tells you everything you need. I said we ran a year-long pilot, and the results of the pilot showed that to see if we achieved our goals. So 93% of participants felt more confident in parenting children after attending the support groups using our curriculum. 87.4% felt less stress, and just about 94% felt that they had found community with others in the same boat. And then we also, again, for facilitator feedback, you can look at these, but the facilitators found it easy to use, and they were more likely to want to continue to facilitate because of the ease of use. All right, it is a subscription service, and it comes out to about $100 a meeting is what it works out to be. And that includes initial facilitator training for both in-person and online. It includes in-time automated access to participants' evaluation. We evaluate the participants after every meeting. It's a part of the training and the curriculum. And your facilitators or your agency directors have access to that right after the meeting if they want. And of course, access to the library. But there are other curriculum, other resources available that you can use. Some of those are Parenting a Second Time Around, great acronym, PASTA. It is through the University of Cornell. There are 8 sessions, and you can purchase this through the Cornell University store. There is also the National Training Development Curriculum. It has themes, which are like classroom trainings, on parenting kids who've experienced trauma or separation or loss, and that could be applicable to kinship caregivers as well. And so that exists. And then you can go old school and invite speakers from the community, somebody from the fire department to come and talk, or a pediatrician to talk about ADHD, or somebody from the Exceptional Children's Program at your school to come talk. One thing that we do stress with this that we have heard over and over, it is your speakers are going to be more reliable if you offer to pay them a stipend, and the usual stipend is about $100. And from what our surveys were, and also make sure you send an email to your speaker the week before and then call them the day of. The other thing is make sure you have lots of social gatherings. This should not all be skill building by any means, so intersperse social gatherings as well. And there are a number of written resources that are available. The Welfare Information Gateway has some great fact sheets. You can have your families look at these fact sheets ahead of time and then talk about them. Let's see, what else? You could also just do a book discussion. If you caregivers will read books, there are so many great books out there right now on parenting. And if you're at a loss, email me and Dawn at Creating a Family, and I'll share a huge list with you. There's also some web resources that you can use with your groups. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network has a resource parent curriculum. It is 8 sessions. It does require 2 trainers. One has to be a resource parent and one has to be a professional, and they have to go through a rather extensive training in order to be able to do this. But they also have fact sheets, so you can have your families read fact sheets first and then discuss them. There are some video resources online. One which I don't know much about, but I know it exists. It is it's Mosaic, it's Understanding the Story. And another one is the Trust-Based Relational Intervention site has some great videos for how to parent kids who've experienced trauma. And we know of groups that have used podcasts where they ask the participants to listen to a podcast. There are a number of podcasts, including Creating a Family's, but there are others out there as well that you could utilize. And we know some who have their families take a course and then come and discuss it in person afterwards. That's a possibility as well. I'll just throw out there that Creating a Family has free courses available that would be applicable if you choose to go that route. And now we will open it up to question and answer.
Thank you so much, Dawn and Kathy. That was great content. There's so many useful curricula out there, and I hope we were able to elevate certainly these two, and there are others. And it was just so valuable to learn from you both. So we got a variety of questions. One we got repeatedly was, is there training for the support group facilitators? And can they be certified as support group facilitators for kin?
I can answer that for the Creating a Family training. I can't answer it for the others. Kathy will answer it for Grand Connections. Yes, we have extensive training. We have debated having certification, but we've not had anybody ask for it yet. But we do have extensive training for the facilitators, and we do have it including both online and in person.
Anna, I saw that you mentioned in the chat that the University of Maine has a certification course for staff working with grand families. So that's a place where you can be certified.
But not for facilitators, I don't believe. I don't think it's for facilitation.
Oh, it's not, you mean it's just for a staff working with? Yeah, that's probably right. As far as ours goes, there is an optional 1-hour webinar that is on our on the Grand Connections website. There's also a facilitator's guide that's probably about 15 pages that talks about why we did what we did and what our recommendations are for facilitators. It includes some of the things that I mentioned that work well at pilot sites.
Thank you, Kathy. And Kathy, are there any books for children ages birth to 5 that you recommend using with them, either in those support groups? I mean, that you recommend as part of the curricula, or that you would recommend separately?
You know, only a few of our picture books some were about grand families, but most were just picture books. And I should mention that for any of the titles we use, they are available in English and Spanish.
Oh, great, thank you. One of the comments that we got in the chat, I would love for both of you to address. And it was, if we're struggling to find grandfamilies to participate in these support groups, are we really just imposing our values on them and, forcing them to do something they don't want to do? So curious what you think of that, Dawn.
No, it's a good question, and something we do need to think about. I think universally that it is a question or a problem that people face. All I can say is that for the people who choose to attend, I think it has been extremely valuable. And I think that we are not imposing our values. I think they're experiencing what we hope they experience, which is a sense of community. So, I do think we need to be cognizant, but I don't think from the people we have attending, we don't see it. And they always have the choice of, this is not mandatory, so.
Right. Thank you, Dawn. How about you, Kathy? Thoughts around that?
I also think it's a good question, one I haven't really considered. Anecdotally, from friends who are going through this and things that I've seen on Facebook where I'm like lurking in a grandparents group, people are really struggling. Having this happen to you, caring for kin that you weren't expecting is difficult, comes with lots of emotions. I think people are often ashamed to admit they need help or don't know where to go for help. So I think that's really the challenge in recruitment, rather than people going, no, I got this. I think it's really not knowing where to go, or kind of a sense of pride that this shouldn't be difficult and I'll handle on my own.
That's my impression of it too. We've worked with the Brookdale Foundation Relatives as Parents program for decades. They started a support group database for kinship back in the mid-90s with AARP. So really years and years of experience with these caregiver support groups. And that once caregivers go, they love it. We have a national network of caregiver advocates, and that's what we hear from them. They find their friend group, they find friends for their children that they're raising. They learn new skills, they share new skills, and they often move to advocacy, which is another comment I saw in the chat, and wanted to elevate that. Generations United has a national caregiver advocate group called Grand Voices. And I believe that application period is open. Victoria Gray, who you shared the video of, is one of the Grand Voices. And I'll encourage the team to drop in the chat if the application or anything about the Grand Voices, if we can. I see a thank you to Victoria Gray in the chat. Any other tips, Dawn, about naming these groups?
Well, I shared that I think that you need to think in terms, for some people, the term support group is a turnoff. And so I think it's important to give some thought ahead of time. And if your group is also wanting to do some skill building as well, support group wouldn't be necessarily reflective. We have changed ours to kinship caregiver gathering. I think they just call it kinship gathering. So I don't know. I think it's important to think about how you phrase it, I think can influence whether people attend.
Yeah. How about you, Kathy? What do you call your groups?
It's called Grant Connections. And I don't know how the pilot sites I think they referred to it as that when they recruited. And I do think, there are many cultures in which seeking mental health help is not really accepted or done frequently, or places where family problems stay inside the family. So I think naming it something that doesn't sound too therapeutic is Dawn is right about that. It's very important. And I see people are mentioning in the chat what they call theirs, so that's helpful.
Yeah, and Victoria Gray, who is one of the grand voices of the Generations United Network and a caregiver herself, shares kinship sharing and resources. I've heard things like coffee conversation, dish and dinner and all kinds of things that
Coffee
kind of
chat. Mhm.
coffee chat. Yeah,
Here's one.
great
Kinship
idea.
Empowerment Group. Boy, I like that one.
Yeah,
Kinship
all
Empowerment, I
right.
like that.
Now, another practice that we've heard about that seems to work really well is, the caregivers relate to other caregivers. So this co-facilitating concept where you have some type of licensed social worker counselor paired with a grandparent or another relative who's raised children as a peer leading these groups. Do either of your curricula work with the joint facilitation concept? Dawn, I'll start with you.
Our curricula is that you are not required to have a joint facilitator. You're not required for the facilitator to be a trained, a social worker. It was intentional that we didn't do that to make it easier. Parents can themselves can use this curriculum and run the group. However, with the groups we run, we do have somebody from our staff as well as a kinship caregiver lead the group.
Thank you, Dawn. How about you, Kathy?
No specific requirement or suggestion that a kinship caregiver participate in the running of the group, but a real emphasis that is described in the facilitator's guide and throughout about letting as much information as possible come from the participants. If someone says something that's misguided and the facilitator can hold off, another participant might offer a different point of view. So all of us as people who want to pass on information need to curb ourselves to be quiet and let the info come from others. And I think that works.
That's a good tip. Yeah, allowing for that quiet time, that empty space, which is so hard for some of us, me included. In the chat, we also saw talk about how to fund the food and the transportation pieces. And I dropped in the chat a funding toolkit that the network put out. But do you all have any funding? This is a little bit outside of the scope, but any funding tips on looking for food and transportation resources to facilitate these groups? And I'll start with you, Kathy.
I don't. I think I live in a very small town currently, and I think I would go to the grocers and say, we are doing this. Can you give us a discount, or can you donate some food? I don't know what else. Folks, one of our sites decided that they would offer the workshop quarterly, and I think they were asking for small groups grants of like $2,500 to pay staff and run a 7-week group.
How about you, Dawn? Any tips?
Well, one thing is, of course, going back, even though I believe that meals are better than snacks, dropping to snacks, which are more affordable. The other thing, and a very creative thing that I know of some groups doing, is they try to meet at a church that has a Wednesday night meal, and they see if their families, and if the church would comp their families, because usually for the Wednesday night meal there is a charge for many churches, but the church, because they were able to, and the way they pitched it was, this is as a mission from the church, that the church adopt this as a mission. And that's what they did. The church, the families were able to come and attend and they used the church childcare as well, because the church had childcare that night.
And that same concept would apply to synagogues and other houses of worship too, wouldn't it, Dawn?
Very true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both so much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom. And we will get these resources out to everyone. And just want to share a couple of closing pieces with you all who have joined us today. Thank you so much. And let's see if I can get this up on my screen here, because the challenges are always fun, right? Which is that list that I shared in the chat, which is just, it includes both of the Dawn's program and Kathy's program, the University of Maine. It's just a list of these kinds of training opportunities, and it notes where they're fee-based and where they're free. And please sign up for our monthly newsletter. We send it out once a month. You won't hear from us much more, if at all. And it comes out on Tuesday. So if you sign up today, you will get November's issue. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Don't hesitate to reach out to the network as a resource with any questions. And we'll drop a little survey in the chat if you would be so kind as to take a moment to answer that, so we can learn and grow and make our webinars responsive to you. And you will get all these materials within the next couple of business days. So thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. It was my
Thank you for
pleasure.
having us.
Thank you. Bye all.